When you're diagnosed with bipolar disorder, here is roughly what happens. Someone gives you a name for the thing that's been quietly running your life. They hand you a prescription, and then, more or less, they send you home and wish you luck, which means you've just been handed one of the most complicated machines there is, your own mind, with a lifelong condition living inside it, and almost no instructions for how to run it. No manual. Just, take these and come back in 6 weeks. So today I want to talk about the thing that finally hands you that manual. Because of all the therapies that research has tested as an add-on to medication for bipolar disorder, the one with the strongest evidence isn't the newest or the deepest or the most expensive. It's almost plain enough to be disappointing. It's called psychoeducation. And it means simply being taught your own illness on purpose and in order until you understand it better than it understands you. And I can tell you what that's actually like from the inside, not from a textbook, because the person who built this channel went through it himself. His name is Renee. Not a weekend workshop, not a pamphlet. A 14-month program. I'm Clara. Stay with me, because there was one thing those 14 months gave Renee that no pill ever could. And strangely, it wasn't the information. I'll come back to what it actually was. One thing I have to be completely straight about first, and it holds for every technique on this channel. Psychoeducation works on top of medication, never instead of it. Everything the research shows, the fewer relapses, the steadier years, is with medication as the foundation and the learning built on top of it. Anyone who tells you that education can replace your treatment is selling you something. This is the thing that makes your treatment work better. It is not a substitute for it. So why would something as unglamorous as learning about your illness be the best evidenced add-on there is? Because you cannot manage a machine you don't understand. When you don't know how bipolar actually works, an episode arrives like weather, out of nowhere, and apparently unstoppable. But once you've been taught the mechanics, what your own early warning signs really look like, which triggers matter, why the medication does what it does, what else the illness tends to drag along with it, that same episode stops being weather and starts being something you can see coming from a distance. Studies of structured psychoeducation groups, the landmark one ran in Barcelona, around 21 weekly sessions, found that the people who went through them had fewer relapses in the years that followed, stayed on their medication more reliably, and even spent less on their care than people who didn't. Not because the group was magic, because they finally had the manual. So what's actually in that manual? What does a real education teach you that a diagnosis appointment never has time for? The shape of your own episodes, how yours specifically begin, and what they look like before they're obvious. Your triggers, the disrupted sleep, the skipped dose, the overloaded week. And which ones are yours? What each medication is really doing. So it stops being a mystery pill you resent and becomes a tool you understand. The conditions that so often ride along with bipolar, so they don't ambush you. And the single most useful thing, your prodrome, the private, personal early warning signs that show up days or even weeks before a full episode. Knowing yours is what lets you act while there's still time to act. That's not trivia. That's the difference between getting hit and seeing it coming. Here is what Renee's version looked like, because the shape of it matters. Once a week, for 14 months, a small group, about 10 people, sat down together, and a psychiatrist and a psychologist taught what was, honestly, a class about the illness. And then the group talked and asked and compared notes on what actually happens in a real life with this thing in it. And there's a detail in there that turned out to matter more than anyone planned. Renee's own psychiatrist ran the program and was in almost every one of those classes, which meant that over 14 months, the trust between them deepened in a way a 15-minute medication check never could. His doctor stopped being a stranger who adjusted his pills and became someone who genuinely knew him. That relationship became part of the treatment. And there was a second thing the group did that no individual appointment can, and it caught a lot of people by surprise. For many of them, it was the first time they had ever been in a room full of other people who actually understood. Not sympathized. Understood. People who knew, from the inside, what a racing 3 a.m. felt like, or the specific shame of a spending spree, or the flatness of a depression that no one could see. When you've spent years feeling like the only broken one, sitting in that room does something the facts alone can't. It takes the isolation and the sense of being uniquely defective and quietly dissolves them. You are not the only one running this machine. Other people are learning to run theirs, right next to you. And what they taught wasn't only, here is bipolar disorder. It was everything around it. The other conditions that so often travel alongside it. The anxiety and the rest. The question of motivation, and how the illness bends it. The whole ecosystem of a life lived with this. That's the difference between reading a leaflet and getting an education. And once a month, the room got bigger. The families came, partners, parents, the people who lived this right alongside us. Because the people who built that program understood something a lot of us learned too late. A person's safety net can't be only clinical. Your doctors and your medication are one net. But the people around you, when they actually understand the illness, when they know your early signs, when they know what helps and what quietly makes it worse, become a second net, woven right next to the first one. When the people you love are educated too, you get caught by two nets instead of one. That deserves a video of its own, and it's coming. Now, most people can't walk into a 14-month hospital program, and here's the good news. You don't have to get the core of this. Psychoeducation isn't a place, it's a practice. So, 3 concrete moves. First, ask your treatment team directly whether there's a structured psychoeducation group you can join. A lot of clinics and organizations run them, and a good one is educational and skill-focused, not just a room where people vent. Second, groups run by organizations like the DBSA can do a lot of the same work, often for free. And third, you can start building your own manual today. Learn your prodrome, which is just the clinical word for your personal early warning signs. Learn your triggers. Learn what each of your medications is actually there to do. Write it down. That page is chapter 1 of your manual, and you can start it tonight. And if you want the simplest possible first page, draw 3 columns. In the first, list the earliest signs that you personally are tipping up or down, the ones a partner might notice before you do. In the second, what tends to set those off? In the third, 1 small action for each. Call the doctor, protect your sleep, tell 1 person. That single page, built when you're well, is worth more in a shaky week than anything you'll manage to think of once the week is already shaking. You don't need a hospital to begin. You need a pen and an honest hour. 2 honest caveats, because I refuse to oversell this. First, psychoeducation is not a lecture you passively soak up. It only does its work when the knowledge turns into things you actually do differently. The learning is the start. The skill is the point. And second, this is maintenance work. It's built for the steadier stretches, when you're well enough to take it in, not a rescue you grab for in the middle of an acute crisis. You build the manual in calm weather so that you can read it in the storm. So let me come back to what I promised. The one thing those 14 months gave Renee that the information alone couldn't. Because he'll tell you the facts were never really the hard part. The hard part was accepting that the illness was his. And that is the quiet thing psychoeducation does that nobody prints in the brochure. Somewhere in the middle of learning the machine. Really learning it week after week in a room full of people learning the same thing. You stop fighting the diagnosis and start managing it. The manual is useless while you're still insisting the machine isn't yours. Understanding is what finally let him set the fight down and pick the work up. That was the shift, not information. Acceptance, with the information as the road that got him there. If you'd like some company for that kind of learning, I send out a short, plain language note each week. Small, practical pages of the manual, 1 at a time. It's free, and the link is in the description. Because in the end, you were handed a complicated machine and almost no instructions. And that was never your fault. Psychoeducation is simply you going back for the manual you should have been given. And then, slowly, becoming the one person who can actually run the thing. If this helped, subscribe. We're building that manual here 1 piece at a time. Your next step is on the screen. I'll see you there. And be patient with yourself while you learn it. Nobody is born knowing how to run this. It gets taught, and you can be taught it.